we speak about the obligation to tithe your earnings, which is referred to as maser, to give 10%. Now, what exactly is the basis to tithe earnings? The Torah speaks explicitly about tithing produce, which grows in Eretz Yisrael, tithing wheat, and the Torah uses a term, reiterates the concept of aser ta'aser. It would be enough to say, take 10%. What's ta'aser? So the Gemara explains that although normally you're not permitted to test God, but it cites a verse from Malachi that when it comes to charity, you're permitted to test God. What does it mean? Aser b'shilta shetisasher. That initially, that if you give, you tithe your earnings and your profits as you should, guaranteed you'll become wealthy. And even if your initial intent is only for that reason, it's not a problem. It's not considered you testing God. Because the pasuk in Malachi says, "Ubechanuni nobezos," try me on this one. God says, try me. And if you do it, the blessing will come down from heaven to a point that you won't even have the capacity to be able to receive such a expansive level of bracha. That will be Hashem's response. And Hashem says, Bechanuni, test me on this one. So therefore, from there, we learn the obligation of maser, and not only it engenders wealth. The Torah speaks specifically grain, produce. What about tithing one's earnings? So the Chofetz Chaim says, although it seems to be only permitted to test God regarding the Torah obligation of maser, which is produce, but even if the other obligation is only rabbinical, your earnings, nevertheless, you're permitted to what? To test Hashem. You're permitted. When it comes to charity, God says, try me on this one. Maybe it's even an obligation to take 10% even from your monetary profits, not only from produce. Okay? So he discusses this. A person has an inheritance that came to you. It's not something you earned. Maybe your obligation of maser, of tithing, is only what you earned. Something that's gifted to you, such as an inheritance, or somebody gives you a gift. Maybe you have no obligation to tithe. No. It's mentioned explicitly in Shulchan Aruch that even inheritance, one has to take 10% and give it to charity. We'll discuss what charity. What are the priorities of that? How do you distribute the money? Is it a loan? Is it a gift? The poor, Torah, that's a separate discussion. But the poor, the person is need of charity, a person's poor, he has a priority in that. If a person, it's a question of lending him the money or gifting him the money. And he needs the gift. He doesn't have the means, the ability to pay back. Do you say, well, I'll lend it to you? But you lend it conditionally. If you can't pay back, you don't have to tell the person necessarily that. Open-ended loan. That's charity. It's charity because for all intents and purposes, you don't intend to even receive it back. Okay, we'll discuss all this. So first you have, let's say a person has never took maser, never tithed his earnings. And let's say initially when he starts some business, he has a certain net worth. And that net worth was never tithed. So the basis for your business is that capital. First thing you should do is take 10% out of capital, give it to charity. But let's say you need it to start your business. You could borrow from it. Maybe you designated 10% of that net worth. That's for that's maser. That's charity. But I need it to be able to start my business, to launch my business. If that's the case, you borrowed. You borrowed from the charity, and if a poor man should ever come, you're obligated to go elsewhere, borrow that amount of money, give it to that poor man, because that poor man has first rights on that charity, on that 10%, except you're permitted to borrow. But if your borrowing is going to deny a person who's truly in need, for what he has a right to have, then you have to work out something else to provide for that person the money that you borrowed, which is rightfully his because he's a poor person. Okay, this is just general concepts of taking Maser. Okay. So after you tithe your initial capital investment, now we speak about profits. Start making profit. Now, what's profit? Is it gross profit or is it net profit? Of course, it's not gross, because you have overhead and you have other expenses. You have losses, so you have to do an audit on your income. Am I making money? Am I losing money? So of course you deduct the losses from the gross profit. It's not a profit. You have overhead. You have employees. Whatever it is, all that's deducted from whatever the profits are, and we end up with the net profit. Whatever that net profit is, you have to take 10%, set it aside for charity immediately. Set it aside. If you want to borrow from it, okay, you have to mark it down. That 10% of the investment capital is from the gemach, is from the maser. That has to be, and you have to keep tabs on it. Okay, now, when a person agrees to take maser, if you say, I will always take 10% from my earnings, you know what that's called? That's called a netter. You've made a vow. So if you don't meet that vow, that commitment, it's a Torah violation. You're violating the laws of vows, right? You're violating the laws of Nedarim, which is a very serious offense. So whenever you're going to give maser, it's bli neder. I'm entering into this obligation. If it's wheat, you have no choice. You have to tithe. Money, as I said, is not the same obligation, but it has such great value. If you do, I agree to do it, bli neder. As a result of it, it does not be exactly 10%. You know, we're not perfect. Wheat, you make an evaluation, you have 1,000 bushels, you give 100 bushels. So, you know, earnings, maybe you didn't calculate the losses versus the profits. Maybe you're off, maybe you're shortchanging charity. You never know. You know something? Bli neder. I'm not accepting it as a vow. If it's not a vow, so even if it's not exact, but conceptually speaking, I'm doing what I should be doing. That's what should be done, because otherwise, you're taking a chance, you may be crossing certain lines that you have no right to cross. Because our accounting is not perfect. Okay? That's the way it should be done. It was known to Chofetz Chaim that his wife, I mentioned in the past, she ran a store, small grocery store in Rodman. Whatever she sold salt, she sold candles, she sold just basic amenities that were needed by households. And the Chofetz Chaim, at the end of every day, would go in and audit the day's sales. He would check the scale to make sure the scale weights and measures that it wasn't off, that she wasn't short weighting the people. And again, because he was concerned to take anything which you have no right to take, overcharging. Maybe a person, you didn't give a person his change or whatever it is. So the Chofetz always kept tabs. After a while, he realized, all of a sudden, his business started to earn such profits he never had before. He realized that when word got out that he was the proprietor and his wife was running the store for him, people started to patronize him. When they started patronizing him, the competitor was put out of business. So he felt he's using the crown of Torah for self-interest under those circumstances. He told his wife, we're shutting down the business. At the expense of Torah or expense of anybody, we don't earn profits. Close it down, would not do it under any circumstance. Somehow the Chofetz Chaim always made ends meet. Hashem provides. It's not our own, we have to take initiative. But if the initiative is not appropriate, as the Chofetz Chaim felt it wasn't appropriate for himself, he closed the store down. If a person himself is chosen to oversee a charity, ministers charity, he has no right to take up that money unless it's agreed upon that he's allowed to. But let's say you're the one who's obligated to tithe your earnings. Until you give your money to the charity, You have a right to use that money whenever you choose to use it, as long as you're going to put it back. It's not considered embezzlement. It's not embezzlement. But once you give it to that person who administers the charity, now it's arm's length. You have no right to that money any longer. And now you're bound by the laws of whatever the protocols of that charity is. You could be the greatest donor to that charity. It doesn't make a difference. All of a sudden you fall on hard times, you need a cash advance. The man can't give you priority over anybody else. If somebody's more needed than you are, you wait in line. Because again, it's no longer, you have no access to that money any longer. You become a stranger to it. But if it's in your personal account and it's my maser, then you can use it for multiple things. I want to buy svarim to lend out to others that they should be able to study, that you should have the merit that they're studying due to the maser that you gave. You can do that. As long as that's part of the original commitment, you're only bound to the degree that you commit yourself, not to anything beyond your commitment. This is what he discusses over here. Gemara tells us that when you give charity, you're not permitted to give more than 20%. Why aren't you permitted to give more than 20%? Because if you give more than 20%, you're giving charity to help the poor, to help those who don't have. What happens if you overextend yourself charity-wise? If that's the case, you're actually weakening your own financial base. So here you're trying to help others. In the meantime, simultaneously, you're actually undermining yourself, and you're going to the poorhouse. Therefore, Chazal came up with a formula that says, you give 20%, you're still in safe territory. That's not going to put anybody in jeopardy. We go beyond 20%, you're taking a chance. Therefore, one should not give more than 20%. What about if a person's phenomenally wealthy? And he gives more than 20%, the person's worth $100 million. And he gives 20%, he has a lot left. He's not jeopardizing his financial base. So if a person's phenomenally wealthy, or the 20% that wouldn't put a dent in his financial profile, you give more than 20%. But for the average person, 20% you should not cross that line. As much as you're well-meaning and you want to help others, because you could be hurting yourself, therefore it should not be done. You're not permitted to do it. Okay? This is all laws which pertain to this. So 10% is minimum, 20% is maximum. So the Chofetz Chaim cites a Rambam. The Rambam's position is 10% is for the average. What about a person's a wealthy person? A wealthy person, it's not he's doing a nice thing. A wealthy person should give 20%. It's not, he really has an obligation to give 20%, a wealthy person. An ordinary person, 10% is a substantial percentage of his earnings. But a person's wealthy, l'chatchila, it's based on a Vilna Gaon, the way he understands the Rambam, you should give 20%. L'chatchila. L'chatchila means optimally you should give 20%. Rav Steinman, Zecher Tzaddik V'Rachman, showed me that the Gra writes, the Vilna Gaon writes, that anybody who's always committed to give 20% will never have any financial reversals. He's always going to be guaranteed, but you have to do it on an ongoing basis. It's not 1 year you give 10%, next year you give 20%. Ongoingly, you always make sure you're giving 20%. That person will have a special shmirah. God will watch over the person, that he will always be in the black. He won't go into the red if he does that. The Gedolim used to say, but I didn't talk about secular Jews. If all Jews, observant Jews, would give 10% as they should, no Jewish cause would be actually shortchanged. They would not be financially in need. There are a lot of Jews, people who understand, but yet when it comes to this, unfortunately, they cut corners. It's not a good time now. I can't afford it now. And it's not you put it into the borrow column. I owe. They don't create an O column. I owe you, and they put a note in there. I owe charity so much money. If that would be the case, there would never be a financial shortfall. any Torah institution. What about a person who wants to support Torah and he wants to give more than 20% to support Torah? Does that fall under the category you should not give more than 20%? So Chafetz Chaim explains, what a person wants to invest 50% of his capital in some kind of investment because he believes he's going to have a significant return. Is it a problem? No. Here we're talking about charity. What you're doing for someone else. What about when you come to support Torah, you're an investor, and the Torah that's being studied is attributed and accrues to the person who gave the money, because that Torah is only being studied because he provided the means that the people should be able to study, or Torah should be able to be disseminated. He said that doesn't fall under the guise of not giving more than 20%, because there it's an investment. It's called Harzokas Torah. The person who supports Torah is a partner in Torah, and he gets full credit as the person who studies the Torah. Therefore, it has no relevance to this. It's speaking when you're giving charity to feed poor people, to clothe poor people, put a roof over poor people's houses. So there you're doing for the other person. That's chesed. Chesed, as they say, charity begins at home. You can't do charity for others where actually you're putting your own financial base into jeopardy. Okay, so it depends what exactly you're supporting. Let's say a person receives a stipend from his father. He says to his son, I'll give you $100,000. 90,000 is for your personal expenses. $10,000 to give to charity. Because I don't want you to be embarrassed. If poor people come to you, you should have money. So it shouldn't go and you don't have to take out of yours what you need for yourself. You have an additional 10,000 to give to charity. The son is a little greedy. He says, look, I have control of the money. And he puts his hand in the till and he crosses the line, takes off that additional $10,000. What is he doing? He's definitely doing the wrong thing, because that additional money was only given to him to give to charity. The Gemara tells us that one's yearly earnings, the stipend, the allocation is designated from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. Now, in that allocation is also allocated, you should have enough money to give to charity. So if that amount is 10%, that means if you earn 100,000, 10,000 of that 100,000 was never meant to be yours. Well, this year I don't think I'm giving charity. What do you mean not giving charity? That 10,000, yeah, that's called embezzlement. You have no right. That money was earmarked for the poor, and it was given to you for poor. So, psychologically speaking, so the best way to do it, not to delude ourselves, immediately when you earn the money, you give it away. Put it in a fund, in an account that it's arm's length. You can't touch that money, whether it's Fidelity, whether it's communal charity, whatever it is. Once you put it there, you get the tax donation immediately, and then you have no access. The only access you have, you can make a suggestion where the money should go charity-wise. But in terms of your personal usage, you can't touch that money anymore. That's the best way to do it. Otherwise, people will get very conflicted. We delude ourselves. We have the right. This year, maybe not, maybe yeah. This year, I have expenses. No such thing. There's not even a consideration even to go near that money because you don't have access to that money.